All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today for the second day of the Graduate Careers Exploration Week. Today, we again have an exciting panel for focusing on graduate careers in academia, but focused on non-teaching roles. So, again, just as a heads up, some housekeeping items that I wanted to mention. The session will be recorded and it will be available next week on our YouTube channel as well as our Media Space channel. So if you or any of your friends didn't get a chance to see the whole panel or miss the panel altogether, you can watch the video next week. Also, my role for today is to just facilitate the conversation. I'm going to be kind of sitting in the background, but this session is basically for all of our students and our postdocs and all of our attendees. So I would love if you all could be engaging, if you're able to, maybe even turn on your camera so that our alumni can see your faces. That would be great. And then in terms of asking questions, you can either unmute yourself and ask questions that way, or you can use the reaction button at the bottom to raise your hand and ask questions, or you could put questions in the chat. If you're uncomfortable asking questions in the chat, you can also message it to me directly, and I'm happy to ask that for you. So without any further ado, I'm going to get started and turn it over to our alumni panelists who are here today. We're going to start off with introductions, just a little bit about yourself, where you are currently, and a little bit about your current roles as well. So Erin, since you're first on my list, we're going to go ahead and get started with you.
Thanks, Jennifer, and thanks for the invitation to be here today. Right now I'm at Bayer Crop Science, but I was in academia for the last 15 years. I graduated from the University of Illinois with a PhD from Dr. Jeff Moore in 2008, and I spent a couple of years actually at the U of I teaching the large lecture general chemistry and organic chemistry courses. And then my husband actually graduated from the program as well, and he took an industry position at Dow AgroSciences, now called Corteva in Indianapolis. So I've had a very winding road in terms of my career because I've what the American Chemical Society calls a two-body opportunity, and some people call a two-body problem. I have experienced that a little bit, and that's why I've moved around so much. So I taught at a private undergraduate institution, a community college, lots of different places. And last place I taught was at the University of Missouri St. Louis, where I was the assistant director of their Center for Teaching and Learning and had an affiliate appointment in their chemistry department as well. And 6 months ago, I hopped over to industry to try something new, and we can talk about why and how that looks like at Bayer Crop Science, where I work in their regulatory sciences division in a group called Regulatory Scientific Affairs. So we communicate, we utilize our science communication skills to communicate about the safety and benefits of our products. So that's a little bit about me. So I'll turn it over to, was Alexis next? She was the next in the room.
Yeah,
so.
Let's stick with reverse alphabetical order.
Dean is very eager to introduce himself, I guess.
Well, I'm Alexis Thompson. I am a 2008, like Erin, graduate of the chemistry department. I did my PhD with Professor Todd Martinez in the physical area. And I, unlike Erin, have had been at the University of Illinois ever since. I've been in the graduate college and have done a variety of different roles here. I started out as an assistant director of career services and then moved into different types of student support roles. And my current position is associate dean for student success in the graduate college. And so the areas that are that are in my portfolio are all the programs and services that we provide students to help them come in to graduate school, understand what it means to be a graduate student, and progress through the program. That includes, orientation resources, our diversity, equity, inclusion programs, career and professional development, well-being, and problem solving, if anything arises. So it's very lovely to talk to you, and I'm excited to share some of my experience with you today. Dean?
Well, those are hard acts to follow, and I should have gone first instead of last. But I've actually been in Champaign, Urbana here since 1987, and in one form or another have done something with the University of Illinois over all those years. I did go to graduate school here. I graduated in 1994. Then I did a postdoc with Jonathan Sweeler, and a lot of people will know Jonathan Sweeler. And I did nuclear magnetic resonance with him, NMR, for the first time, having zero background in it, He needed this project done. And I guess I was like dumb enough to try it, but it worked, which proved out to be pretty useful in hindsight. We started a company based on some of the technology we developed and the products we discovered. And then I finished the postdoc with Jonathan Sweeler and worked at the company we helped found with some other colleagues for about 15 years, but that was an NMR equipment company. And then Vera Mines, who Erin remembers as running the NMR lab up to about 2009 or 2010, retired after 25 years running the lab. And I was still using the lab to develop products with in NMR. And she said, why don't you apply for this job as a director? And I kind of said, well, why would I want to do that? And she kind of said, well, because you'd be good at it. I kind of, oh, really? So I thought about that. And our company was going through some transitions at that point too. And it seemed like a good time to do something new. So I did. And I have to say that this is not really, and I suspect that Erin and Alexis would agree with this. The jobs we're in now, we really didn't plan on being in. And I would say, in fact, that we didn't really, as much as I worked with Vera for 15 years and she was NMR director, it never once occurred to me that I would have or should have her job. That never popped into my head even once. But I think that the message is that you need to be prepared as you go through your career to always be flexible and open to some odd possibility that comes around the corner that you don't even know exists. And we'll do our best we can to highlight how to get ready for those circumstances. But I think we're all kind of a bit surprised to find ourselves doing what we're doing now, but probably pretty pleased as well. And my job, at least, is very gratifying because I still get to work with graduate students. And that's a terrific bunch of people. And I consider myself very fortunate to be here. As they say on TV, Jennifer, back to you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you all for your introductions. Amazing to hear where you're at now and how winding your careers have been so far. So students, I'm just going to turn it over to you now for any questions that's coming up in your mind. Let's see who wants to go first.
I have a question. So Dean, you mentioned you didn't expect that this would be the role you're in, and likewise probably for you, Erin and Alexis. So what were you planning on going into while you were in graduate school, or kind of like what was your goal career? And why didn't you choose that if it wasn't what you actually went into?
Yeah, I mean, mine changed a lot over the years, and I originally wanted to be an environmental chemist, and I actually have a master's degree in that field from, oddly enough, the School of Public Health at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, because that's where they put environmental chemistry back in the, let's see, 80s, the late 80s, because environmental chemistry didn't have a niche there. And I then got more interested in kind of the analytical chemistry aspects of that field, wound up getting a PhD in that field, and then just kind of went with the flow. I thought I was going to be a faculty member at some point, but then this work that I did in the Sweetler Group as a postdoc developed into a company because we got some patents and things just kind of naturally went in that direction. But I'm still in an environment where I still work with faculty members and graduate students. So even though I'm not the traditional faculty member, I still am in a position where I work with those folks every day. And that's a neat thing. So I still kind of get to be in that environment, maybe not do exactly what those people do, but I have my own things to do. And like I said, it's a pretty terrific job. I'm 68 years old, and people say, when are you going to retire, Dean? And I say, I don't know, really, because I'm really having mostly fun most of the time on the job. And I've got great colleagues, and I really don't know when I'm going to retire. And I'm sure Erin and Alexis have probably completely different stories.
So thanks for this question. And I think it really points to something that's already been referenced, which is that careers are very serendipitous, and it's really an intersection of interests and opportunities and, all sorts of external and internal factors. So I went to a small undergraduate institution that has a really strong tradition in undergraduate research. And so I was involved in undergraduate research for my first semester, really loved my experience there, and, came to graduate school really thinking that I wanted to become a faculty member at an institution much like the one that I had attended. And, I have colleagues who have gone on in those paths, and I think that those are fantastic opportunities. But as I was moving through my program, I started thinking about what were the parts of my day, what were the parts of my week that were the most kind of energy giving, exciting to me. And, one of the things that I had the opportunity to do as a graduate student was get involved in some different administrative type things, serve on committees, be part of a curriculum review, help organize programs. And, I started to realize that that was what was giving me more energy and excitement than, trying to ask a very specific research question. Wasn't that I disliked the research, but I just sort of felt less tied to, I have to find the answer to this one very specific question. And so, I realized the tasks that I was enjoying doing were more on that administrative side. And at the same time, I had become more and more convinced that graduate students as a group were a group that really needed some support and resources within the institution. And this was sort of 2005, 2010 was sort of at this budding era of graduate student services. There had, historically been a lot of undergraduate student services, and graduate student services were, just beginning to kind of come on people's radar. And so I was really excited about an opportunity to think about how I could spend my career and invest that energy into thinking about how to kind of improve experiences for graduate students. So those were the things that opened that door. And then, as opportunities have presented them to me, I think those are the kind of questions I ask myself, right? Which is, what are the kinds of things I like doing, and what are the kinds of impacts that I want to make?
Yeah, I think I'll echo a lot of the things that both Alexis and Dean said. So when I was a first generation student in my family, and I think I got involved very early in my undergraduate career in research as well. And I think, that's what really kind of sparked my interest for chemistry. It wasn't the classes, it was the research. And I remember the first molecule that I made, that my advisor told me no one has ever made this molecule before. And that was like, oh my gosh, that was mind blowing for me as an undergraduate, that I had made something that no one else on earth had made before. And I had advisors telling me like, oh, you need to go to grad school, you need to, become a professor. Like I really, these people believed in me, and they didn't have like bad intentions or anything like that. They were encouraging me, but I think I was listening to other people sometimes too much along the way. So when I entered graduate school, I think my advisor also had a very specific plan for me as well, but I started listening to kind of what I was experiencing as well in graduate school. And I really loved the teaching part. You know, I enjoyed research, but teaching was what I really, really liked doing. I had the opportunity, I don't know if they have this at the U of I anymore, but we had the opportunity to basically teach a Gen Chem class as an undergrad or as a graduate student. I think they called it like 101 TV or something like that at that time. And you taught 4 days a week. You had your pretty much your own class. And then someone, Tom Hummel at the time, wrote the exams for us and kind of guided us through the process. But I really fell in love with teaching at that point. And so I had decided by the end of my graduate career that I really wanted to focus on teaching. And then, like I said, I've had, it's not just all about, necessarily you and your career path. It's your family and what, other, you have to having to balance those opportunities as well. And so the reality is that teaching positions paid a lot less than industry positions. And so I've kind of followed my husband wherever he has gone in terms of his industry career. But I kept looking for new opportunities to make a greater impact. And so I kept going from different teaching positions and finally to a Center for Teaching and Learning, where I did a lot of those like campus level initiatives around teaching and learning and professional development for faculty, and lots of those different types of things that were more project oriented. I really realized that, and someone tried to recruit me back to apply for a tenure track position, and that's when it really kind of dawned on me, like I really don't want to do that. I don't want to focus on a narrow topic. I really like doing a lot of different things and learning new things. And that's what also led me to the new transition outside of academia, where I wanted to see what my impact could be using the skills I gained from academia in industry in a very different context, but using similar skills. So it's a really good question. I think most people, I think it's more common to have a winding path than a straight path anymore, and that's okay.
Erin, do you use your teaching skills and can you follow some of your teaching interests in your current job? What kind of teaching component is involved in your current job?
Yeah, so for example, that's a good question. It's funny to see how much overlap there is. Like I'm planning a global meeting for our whole team in 2 weeks. And so I have to facilitate 3 days of sessions. And so it's been interesting guiding my colleagues along in that path and thinking through, it's really teaching. And then science communication, that's how I kind of sold my skills to Bayer Crop Science too, is that I spent 15 years teaching, explaining, difficult chemical concepts to, undergraduates who don't have necessarily a strong science background. And so, I'm using my science communication skills from teaching in that realm as well. So I see a lot of different ways where I'm using those skills.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you all for sharing all that. And then I had a question for from someone in the chat, and this is more geared towards Erin. You've worked in multiple teaching positions, as you said, and also now you're in a company. Can I know the differences you've had in those positions and some pros and cons even maybe?
Yeah, I've taught at U of I, very well-resourced chemistry department, I would say. We had our own person that helped us with educational technology just for chemistry. And I went from there to a rural community college in Indiana, where when the power went off during my final and they plugged in hot plates to help us heat up, which on so many levels is not a good idea. So it was a very, different experience, but I learned so much about teaching and the importance of context and, how to connect with students in that way. it was also, you know, I didn't last there very long because it was an hour commute each way, and they had me teaching from 8 a.m. till 10 p.m. some nights. So then I went to a private undergraduate institution that was, again, well-resourced, but a very teaching focused. And so that it was nice to be in a place where teaching was really the focus. And then I went to a private Catholic institution. So as you can imagine, that's a very different context as well. And then a regional college, which is not well resourced, that had students that were mostly commuting. So again, just those different contexts, I think, have really provided me a really broad perspective that at the time I was like, oh man, this is really hard starting over again in all these different contexts, but it's made me much more agile and flexible. And I really am able to take a step back and really learn and understand about students. And I think that's helped me in my current role too. We're undergoing a complete restructuring. So I've had to be very flexible and agile starting out in my new position too.
You know, teaching skills that you get in graduate school translate to a lot of other things. And Erin, a lot of things have popped into my head based on your comments. So when I went from academia as a postdoc to industry, we had this product, but people didn't know how to use it. So we had to teach them how to use it. So we wrote all these documents. We didn't do videos then. We would now. And we would go out and hold tutorial sessions at places that bought our product. And then here on this job, we basically are in a role where we have to teach people how to use equipment. So we have, you know, dozens of instructive documents on how to use equipment. And we also have to write documents to teach each other how to do things as employees. Because when somebody goes on vacation, somebody else has to do that person's job. And that's sort of cross training where you are working with one of your colleagues, like right next door, to teach them how to do your job when you're, you know, on vacation or sick or something. All of that stuff goes back to an ability to teach. And I worked full-time in the NMR lab, but for I think 11 years, I actually taught a course every fall in quantitative chemical analysis, an undergraduate course. And I had to get permission to do that, but they asked me to do it year after year after year because they never seemed to have enough faculty members to teach the courses. So interestingly enough, I did teach undergraduate college courses as part of this job. It's actually slightly outside the job, but I was able to maintain that for as long as I wanted to. I gave it up last fall because I wanted to do other things, but it was a fun thing to do for 11 years or so.
Yeah, thank you. Alexis, did you have something to add?
Well, so one of the things that Dean said sort of kind of made me think about something that is sort of I've noticed is sort of different about these types of settings from being a grad student is, you know, Dean really talked about the collaborative nature, the cross training, the you know, filling in for colleagues when they're out. And I think that that was one of the things that appealed to me about moving into more administrative roles like this, was being able to bring my skills, but also bringing my skills as part of a team, so that it wasn't just on me. You know, like if I was gone, the whole world didn't shut down. It was, you know, really about, you know, me getting people ready to do the thing while I was gone. And so, you know, I had a baby a few years back. And so, you know, I was on, you know, leave for months, and I had just a huge amount of confidence that I was going to be able to walk out the door and my colleagues were going to be able to keep everything rolling, and that, you know, that I was going to be able to slot back in when I was done. And so, that to me was something that I really sought out in these roles, and is something that's really kind of played out in how they've worked for me.
Awesome. I have another question from the chat, and then we'll move on to the raised hand question too. how broad do you think is the scope of non-teaching roles in academia? If you had to change jobs for any reason, do you feel like you would have to make a big career path pivot, or move into a very different type of role, or are there lots of similar roles to what you do? Also, what does mobility look like in your position? In academia, usually the goal is kind of tenure, so in industry, maybe you climb the management ladder. So what's the analogy here, in terms of mobility?
So maybe I'll take the second part first, right? I mean, tenured faculty jobs are really the exception. If you look across the entire landscape of jobs in terms of something where, you can have a job that's sort of guaranteed for as long as you want to keep it. I really see my job has been very stable. I've gotten promotions, even though, the U of I has gone through periods where we've been under budget cuts and things like that. My job has never been at risk. So, I think that where I would really say is it's about your skills, and it's about adding value to the place that you're in. And I think that, with your skills and adding value, I think that there will be opportunities. And that's not something that I lose sleep at over at night in terms of, will there be a position for me in 1 year or 5 years or 10 years? So that's not something that really I spend a lot of time worrying about.
Yeah, my job, I would say right now, is a hands-on managerial position. I do stuff, but I also manage stuff. So if I were to look for another job, I would look for something that involved managing lots of people doing complicated things. And my coworker, Nikki, has come from an interesting background. She did food quality testing at Kraft here in Champaign. But she would go around and work with dozens of people and collect samples using standard procedures to collect and analyze and process the data. So, gee, what does she do here in the NMR lab? Well, she goes around and talks to lots of users about how to handle and process data, and also does everything to enable that. So her job is completely different than her old job in food science, but there are also a lot of similarities. And that's just the kind of thing that it's hard to think about that, because she did not know and could not know probably anything about this job prior to applying for it. And I think when she got here, she was scared because she's thinking, I don't know how to do any of this stuff. And I'm thinking, hey, I can take somebody with her skill set and teach her how to do the job. That's exactly the kind of person I'm looking for. So this ease of being able to move around, like Alexis has mentioned, comes down to skill sets, not so much subject areas. It's skill sets and how they transfer. Mobility on my job is, this job is technically a dead-end job. That sounds terrible, but I can't be promoted to anything. It would be a different job. It would be like a completely different job. It might be in the School of Chemical Sciences, but it would not be this job. And that would go for my coworkers as well. Like one of the people we had here did solid state NMR, but he did it for 8 years before he went to Exxon. So his job, it wasn't a dead end. He just wanted to do other things. He did interesting things with interesting people on a wide variety of topics over the years. But a lot of times, if somebody wants to like move up the ladder in what we would call a service position that I'm currently in, it would be through a different job. And it's kind of expected that might happen someday.
And can I say something to that, Dean?
Yeah.
I think that there's also sometimes a sense that, especially if you're kind of thinking about positions that have a very clear ladder, assistant professor, associate professor, full professor, you're really thinking about moving up that ladder. But I think that there is a real way to think about how within one job title, within one same kind of overall set of responsibilities, you go deeper into that job, right? You have an opportunity to develop yourself personally and professionally through new projects, new collaborations, through, having a reputation and creating partnerships across campus. And there are other ways that you can sort of expand your impact and influence that isn't through necessarily like a change in job title. And so I encourage you to kind of think about that piece as well, because I think in some of these places that are very specialized, right, like director of an NMR lab, or, and my job title is not going to change. That's what it is. But that doesn't mean that I don't have new exciting opportunities to grow in.
Yeah, well put. I agree.
But I think it is important to make that clear distinction between, having that very clear ladder. Like, you have to build those opportunities a lot of times yourself, and be looking for those opportunities. And so, if that's not something that interests you and you really want to have that clear ladder, that's something to consider. And I mean, I'll be completely honest, that's one of the reasons why I left my last position. It was a dead end job in that, like, I could go deeper, but I really couldn't do the things that I really wanted to accomplish in that position. And there was no, I mean, money is a reality, right? I mean, I was paid the same thing for 4 years and had no opportunity for a raise or a movement up. And so for me, that really got frustrating because I kept being told that they were going to create that new opportunity for me, and it wasn't happening. And so it's something to consider in these different positions too, and something to ask when you interview or consider the position. A lot of these positions don't have clear promotion paths, and it's very institution dependent. I think U of I is a very big school where there are opportunities to move around. If you're at a smaller school, that might not be the same case where you'll have opportunities to move around within an institution. So lots of things to think about, as you're interviewing and pursuing these different paths. But for me, I had been recruited from other schools, but like Dean said, I would have to move to a different position. So I was being pursued for associate vice provost positions, but I would have to move out of the city. And I have 2 kids, and we wanted to stay in St. Louis for their schooling. And so, I pursued a different opportunity that kept me in St. Louis. So, there's lots of different factors to consider. It's not just about the job, it's about your context and what's best for you and your family too.
Erin, are you at the Chesterfield site in St. Louis?
I am.
Yeah, I've been in your building many, many times when it was Pfizer.
Oh, yeah. It's a nice building.
All right, we'll move on to the next question from Jasmine.
Hey, so
Hi,
some of you,
Jasmine.
some of you know me. I'm saying hi from Minnesota. Thanks, Jennifer and Patricia, for letting me know about these events. Um, so I have a question. I think like all of you can answer it, but especially Erin, since you've moved around a lot. So I wanted to ask like how you deal with that, because I've like seen people deal with applying for jobs that does not look fun, and to like constantly do it and like be uncertain about where you'll end up seems very challenging. So I wanted to ask like how you deal with that, and how like I'd rather go through like the uncertainty of the job market than like keep staying in my current position.
That's a really good question. I think it just, for me, I was kind of forced to because I was moving around for my husband. But I got a lot of good advice from another mom that was also a faculty member, that whenever you move somewhere new, I would look up all the chemistry departments and I would send out my CV and introduce myself. I would join the local like American Chemical Society events. I would network as much as possible. And especially when teaching positions come up, I was kind of at the top of their list of like, oh yeah, I met that lady at the ACS event. Maybe I should give her a call. And so, but yeah, I mean, I'm not going to lie that every time, you kind of have to start over. You have to create your new network on campus. You have to get to know the culture and the context. And, but like I said, in many cases, I was kind of forced to do that due to moving around. But the last two, I made that choice because I wanted a new opportunity. I wanted to learn something new. But every time, like this is what I had 5 institutions when I just started at Bayer Crop Science 6 months ago. It's like 6 months in, I finally feel like I have kind of a network. I can speak somewhat the Bayer like industry language, and but yeah, it is taxing every time. But I really focus on building a network everywhere I go.
And I haven't had the same experience Erin has, but I have applied for jobs while I've been in my position. And I will say that it is a very different experience doing that than applying without having a position, right? Because in that case, you're applying for every single thing under the sun and hoping something pans out. But if you're in a position and you're looking to find something a little bit better, then you're more selective. It feels like lower stakes in some ways because they have to, that position has to be better than what you're in order for you to want to make that shift.
Thanks, Jasmine, for that question.
Well, thank you.
I had another question that came through the chat. Do you consider a postdoc to be beneficial or a requirement for the positions that you are in or have held?
For me, a postdoc turned out to be vital, but I didn't know that. I didn't know it in advance. It just kind of like, Jonathan Streeter walked down the hall one day and said, I really need somebody to work on this project. And, you seem like you'd be good at that. And I said, well, I don't know anything about that project. He said, well, that's exactly the kind of person I want to do it because I've been told it probably won't work. And I want you to figure out a way for it to work. So sometimes a postdoc can send you in a brand new direction. And I remember when I first became a postdoc, I thought, wow, I don't have to worry about cumes. There's an old word, cumes. I don't have to worry about prelims. I don't have to worry about original research proposals. I don't have to worry about coursework. I don't have to worry about teaching. All I have to do, I don't have to worry about money, although, you're not exactly rich when you're a postdoc, but you don't have to worry about the money. And I thought, gee, all I have to do is research. Hey, this is pretty good, And that was really the first time in my whole life where kind of the slate got cleared and it was like, okay, do this. And that's a pretty rare circumstance, actually. I think that when you get into a company, there's a lot of complications in companies with new jobs. There's a lot of safety considerations, a lot of procedural things you have to worry about, sometimes legal matters, confidentiality issues, and so on and so forth. But the postdoc was like, hey, just do your research. And I found that to be really quite, I guess, kind of a fresh air sort of situation compared to graduate school. But that doesn't mean you have to do a postdoc. It doesn't mean you should do a postdoc. I think you have to really think about it. But if something out there looks like it would be interesting to pursue, even though you may know nothing about it, you'll be working with colleagues who do, and you can probably succeed and do well in a brand new field.
Yeah, I think it really depends on your context and what you want to do with your career. I didn't do a postdoc. I did realize like if I would have, really wanted to go the tenure track route and I, pursued things in chemical education, a postdoc would have been very helpful. And so that did limit me a bit in terms of taking that route. But I think it really depends on your context and what you want to do. And like Dean said, it's very different than being a grad student. It's a nice time to be, really focused on your research, but a lot of times you're helping to, I know in Jeff's lab, a lot of the postdocs were mentoring a lot of students as well, and helping them develop themselves in terms of their research. So that'll be dependent on the lab that you choose as well.
And I would agree with both Dean and Erin. And I would say, the positions that, in my kind of scope do not ever require a postdoc. It's not sort of like that in the door, you have to have a postdoc to be considered. It's more about, is there a skill that you're developing there that is, kind of helping get you closer to what that job is looking for.
The nice thing about a postdoc also is that it can be an experiment. And what if I try this? What if I don't like it? Well, it's over in a year or two. And that's a nice opportunity to leave, as the case may be.
All right. Another question that came through in the chat. Do you feel that your managers or supervisors that you've had in your positions are open to hearing or responding to your concerns, such as parental leave, support in cases of discrimination, that sort of thing? And how has this changed in your various roles?
So, I mean, I can go first. I think that one of the things about working in kind of more the academic administration side is more structured than the research side in terms of, I think that there are more clear kind of reporting lines, and, all the policies and everything are very clear. And, I feel like I've always been very supported. I think that the policies and procedures that are available to me, for instance, when I was taking parental leave, were clear, and I was very much supported in taking that taking that. I didn't get any sort of pushback in that regard. And, I think often in these environments, you're also working with a lot of people who are doing a lot of different types of roles. I mean, it's not just, we're working in really very cross-disciplinary teams. And so I think that environment really is appreciative of what everybody is bringing. And I have always found it a very supportive work environment.
Yeah, I think we're at a point in academia, at least at the University of Illinois, where it's realized that if you are going to have the best people, you better figure out a way to accommodate the best people. And I think that that's largely understood these days. Maybe Erin can speak more about the industry perspective on that.
With my 6 months of experience, I don't know how much I can.
Hey, what?
And I haven't, gone through the parental leave or experienced that in industry. My kids are 8 and 12, and I agree that I think academia has changed a lot in the last 10 or 15 years. So I actually decided, I'm also from Canada originally, and so taking like 3 months off or 6 weeks off with a child felt very foreign to me. So I actually took, in between U of I and after the community college position, I took 2.5 years where I worked contract work for a textbook company and did adjunct work on the side for that same community college, and stayed home with my daughter for 2.5 years. And then with my son, we were moving here to St. Louis, and so I was looking for a position at that time. So I stayed home with him for 14 months, I think. So I, was very privileged in that way that I was able to lean on my husband's salary at that time. And so I didn't necessarily have to experience the parental leave in each of those cases, but that's, not specific to academia, that's specific to the United States, that we don't have a generous, parental leave, although that's, changing, I think, in a lot of spaces. And I can't speak for the U of I in particular at this time. I knew at the time because we had some graduate students that had some children during our graduate career. But I think in industry, it's very similar, and you can take, you can save up and bank extra time and take some of your vacation time to stay home with kids and things like that. And I think there are more generous policies for both parents now as well. Before it kind of really rested with whatever they qualified as the mother or the main caregiver. And I think there's much more generous leave for both parents at this point. I think we still have a long way to go in that realm. And I would say, for the most part, I felt supported because we never had family in town in any of the places where we've lived. And so anytime a kid was sick or, I had to go, like today I've got, it's election day in Missouri. And so I've got 2 kids home today. And so I was allowed to work from home today. So in that way, I feel like I was supported in a lot of my different roles. And I think that's changed a lot since COVID as well. I remember even when I started in the Center for Teaching and Learning, nobody in my center had kids at the time, and they were like, we have to be on the hall 4 days a week, because I approached them about staying home one day and working from home 1 day a week. And now there's a very much a different approach to work, and it's much more accepted to work from home when you have to as well. So I think that's a big shift in academia and industry.
Yeah, I think COVID changed the work at home scenario because it obviously became feasible. It's like, oh, we can do this and it works. And it's a little hard to do NMR from home, but there's days where you can bunch tasks and leave them for computer work and do them at home. And that now is a commonplace thing at the University of Illinois.
Wonderful. So I don't have any more questions in the chat, but what other questions do our students have? So I have maybe one question from my end. Can you very briefly described at the beginning, kind of like your day-to-day or what you do in your current roles, but can you give us a little bit more of a deep dive into your role at your current positions?
Who wants to go first? Well, gosh, where does one begin? I do some tutoring. I have a tutoring session this afternoon. I do things like this. We also manage magnets. We manage hardware. We manage repairs. We manage maintenance on our equipment. And we also work on documents. And on any given day, I may be fixing something, talking with someone, planning an experiment, discussing data, repairing something, working on something involving recycling helium, which has become a big deal for us, handling liquid nitrogen. It's a variety of things. Sometimes we do some machining, sometimes we do some chemistry, sometimes we help other groups do their chemistry. And one of the common things is that we have to be very flexible. It is frequent for me to come into work and not do what I want to do until about 3 o'clock. And then I kind of wondering, I'm here like 9 to 5:30 or something like that. And I kind of wonder, how am I supposed to do my job when I really have about 2.5 hours a day to do it? But somehow it gets done. And there are days where I have the whole day to myself, and folks seem to be on their own. And one of our goals is to help people to work on their own. And as I look around in the grid here and see NMR users, I hope they know that, and I know that they're independent NMR users, right, Jasmine? And that's one of our goals, is to help people work on their own. And then when they can't, we have to step in and figure out, why is that? Is it something we need to remedy, and how do we do it? So it's a lab job mostly. There is financial work and other work at the computer involved in the lab job, but it is mostly a lab job, which is what I like about it.
So I very much sympathize with Dean with that idea of, I get through most of the day and then I'm like, well, when am I going to do the work that I'm working on? My day is typically very scheduled into meetings. So I, meet with my staff who are working on different projects to kind of, consult with them. And, I see my roles in those places really to help support them and doing the creative and impactful things that they are working on. I do a lot of student meetings. And so, those are in my day. And then, as part of the broader leadership team within the graduate college, I'm on meetings sort of college-wide to think about policies and directions like that. So, often my day is probably 80% in meetings. And then, I'm trying to kind of pack in the and I was going to follow up from this and get this information, or, write this up kind of in between. One of the things that I like about my work is it is highly variable, right? Like as Dean mentioned, I can't really tell you exactly what a week's going to look like. It has a lot of different dimensions to it. And that's something that for me is really rewarding. I like that, sort of rising to what's happening and being able to be responsive and supportive to the individuals around me. So that's a value in my work, and it's something that I get.
I think that's something we all have in common, that maybe we like doing a variety of different things. I can my day every day is very different, and I really like that. One thing I really enjoy about this team is that it's a global team, so which also makes meetings complicated. So I meet with people in Australia, in Singapore, in Brazil, and half of my team is in Germany. So I've learned a lot. I taught a lot about culturally responsive teaching as when I did faculty development for the Center for Teaching and Learning. But now I really feel like I'm living it in a lot of cases. So it's, figuring out how to, best speak to all these different teams. So for example, recently I did kind of an internal review for our team and had to give feedback to all these different teams. And I did a lot of basically qualitative research in order to develop different reports for these teams. But on another day, since we are in outreach and engagement, we get sent to a lot of conferences. So last month I was at an end user drone conference. So I was figuring out how drone users are applying pesticides, and what our pesticide company, we are, partially a pesticide company, how do we best steward that technology with our products? And then I'm working in another space of biologics. So learning about that technology and speaking with regulators, speaking with scientists. So it's, very different every day. And that's something that I really like about it.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. Another question kind of along the same lines that came in the chat. How flexible are your work hours, both current and previous jobs? Are they fixed 9 to 5, or do you have more flexibility?
I mean, this is something that's a huge difference pre-COVID and post-COVID. I mean, pre-COVID, it was very much, in the office, 9 to 5, very structured. Post-COVID, I think, as Dean and Erin had mentioned, we've moved into worlds where I think there's more kind of appreciation for the way that the complex live work inner balance happens. And so I think that there is more sort of openness to things like, you know, I need to leave early this day and I'm going to come in early this day. And there's more of that flexing. I will say that, you know, the way that my work, so a couple of factors, the way that my work is done is very collaborative with other people. So I kind of need to be working around the same times other people are working for that to be particularly effective. And then my personal context is that, you know, I'm the primary parent for a school-age child. And so also my work needs to mirror around when school and childcare is available. And so so both of those things mean that I'm more likely to be working in those like 9 to 5 kind of windows.
So Erin, could you talk a little bit about the time restrictions that are sometimes imposed on researchers in industry? Do you have a comfort level for that?
I mean, sure. I mean, there's, as you mentioned before, there's certain safety issues that come up when you think about working in a lab in industry, or maybe not as enforced as it sometimes should be. I think at least it wasn't in graduate school, of being in the lab when other people are in the lab, and there are, you know, safety procedures in place that are very strict. In industry, I know Bayer takes safety very seriously, and so you know, working in the lab, you have to be there at particular times where other people are around, and so the lab hours generally, you know, fall, and it'll be team dependent, I imagine, but you have to have, you know, times where there are multiple people in the lab at the same time.
Yeah, here in academia, you know, hours are pretty flexible, and people expect to see us when they need us, and that's usually kind of in the hours from about 10 a.m. to about 4 p.m. or 5 p.m. or maybe 6 p.m. And if I see my employees during those times, that's great. When exactly they come in and when exactly they leave, I'm not going to worry about it, because they've got their jobs to do. And their jobs are plenty demanding anyway, and I don't need to know the details. I know that in industry, one of the things that was striking about, well, it's the same building that Erin works in right now, but it was owned by Pfizer at that point. But boy, you had to be out of the building by 6 p.m. That's that. And if you think you're going to start a 4-hour procedure at 4:30, you're not. And you have to organize your day differently than you did in graduate school. When you're in graduate school, it's like, hey, I'll just do that at 10 o'clock tonight. You know, I'll be half asleep, but it doesn't matter because it's a safe procedure anyway. And I'll just put it off and do it later. But you can't do that in industry. You've got to be a little bit more organized. And you've got to fall within their work day, their workflow. But in academia, things are pretty flexible, at least for me. Alexis works in an office. I would imagine your time is a little bit more structured because you have colleagues who expect you to be there as well at certain times.
And since I'm not in the lab, my position's pretty flexible. We do start very early, like because of the time change with global colleagues. So sometimes I'll have meetings at 6 a.m. But that means I get to end earlier. So, but we've had to flex our schedule so that my husband actually, you know, gets the kids off to school, and then I'm here when they are off of school. But, you know, have to be flexible. We've just been told that there's going to be a new expectation that we be on campus 3 days a week, whereas our team right now is remote 4 days a week. So that'll be a big change as well. And that's definitely something I've not enjoyed, is that we don't have offices. So it is an open planned space, and it's the first time I've never had an office. You sit down wherever there is space and plug in your computer, and if you have a meeting, there are rooms that you can go into to take those meetings. But that has been a big shift for me, and that's also the reason why I'm not as excited about going in 3 days a week. So I hope they're going to think through making the campus more amenable to people coming in 3 days a week. And so we'll be talking more about what that looks like. But generally, my supervisor is extremely flexible. And like Alexis was saying, like if kids have to be somewhere, I have to be home to 4 kids, or go to appointments and things like that. As long as I'm getting my work done, that's what they care about. It's not punching a clock. Again, I can't speak for every industry position, but this particular position is pretty flexible.
Great. Another question that also came through the chat. In your opinion, what is one of the most important things that grad students and postdocs could be doing right now in preparation for a career path or a career similar to yours?
I wouldn't plan on a career similar to anybody's, actually. I would plan on openness and flexibility and meeting people, and probably the job you're going to be in 5 or 10 years doesn't even exist now. So I wouldn't narrow myself to looking for a job that is like another person's. One of the best things you can do when you're a graduate student, I think, is attend conferences and go to poster sessions. And I always liked the poster sessions more than the presentation sessions because I could talk to authors. I could skip topics I wasn't interested in. And if I gave a poster, people came and talked to me. And that was really where you met people. It's not exactly a social session, but it's not exactly a real stiff formal session either. So I think poster sessions at conferences are great ways to network and ask people about their jobs and where they're doing them. And again, pursuing an exact job, maybe not the best thing you can do. It's not the most flexible thing you can do. And I'm shocked to think that Erin does not have an office at Bayer. Oh my gosh. I'd have to think about that. But that's the kind of thing, maybe that's a good idea. And when you talk to people in jobs like that, you find, the lights kind of come on and new ideas emerge. And you need to be open to new ideas for your career because honestly, you just do not know what might come your way.
Yeah, kind of echoing what Dean said, I think, if I were to pass along a suggestion for folks who are interested in maybe one of these like non-teaching academic roles, I think the first thing that I would do is encourage you just to pay attention, right? Pay attention to the entire landscape of this institution that you're part of. Look at other institutions and sort of understand how they're structured. Who's doing this work, right? Like what are the things that are happening? And there are so many layers, right? I mean, there are people who are in the Division of Research Safety. There are people who are doing laser safety on campus. There are people who are doing, working in institutional review boards, that are doing science communication, that are doing academic advising, career advising. I mean, you start looking at that and you realize that there are just all of these things that are happening within a university and with a college. And so, I mean, at the scale of University of Illinois, there's just a tremendous amount happening. You may not want to work here. So, also look at other institutions, but trying to kind of familiarize yourself with, what is going on. What are those sort of layers of things that happen at institutions, I think can help you start kind of getting a sense of what the landscape looks like and figuring out, is there a direction that you're interested in learning more about?
Yeah, I think like Alexis said, and Dean, I think you mentioned this too, just like being curious and asking questions. And I think as a PhD or as a postdoc, what you are is an expert learner, and you have that ability to really go into new spaces and learn new things. And as Dean said, that networking component, that's what's gotten me every single job. I applied for, I don't know how many different industry jobs, and they just couldn't see how my skills would necessarily transfer to industry. But I had networked with my current boss in another setting at when I was at University of Missouri St. Louis, and we connected over Twitter. I was very active on Twitter I have a huge network in higher ed on Twitter. A lot of them are not tenure track faculty. They're in all of these kind of, sometimes they're called alt-ac positions. I don't really like that term, but that's something that some folks use, and just asking questions of, a lot of people are open. I get these all the time over LinkedIn of like, can I have an informational interview for 15 minutes to get an idea of what you're doing? How did you frame your skills? I look over I maybe should charge for this. I don't know, but I look over resumes all the time for different people and meet for coffees and different things, because I think I'm just kidding. I think what you put out there, you get back. And I really enjoy doing that too. But the more you can just be curious and ask questions and network with different people, the more you can get information of like, oh, maybe that's something that I would like to pursue. What are those skills that I need to get to that particular type of position?
Yeah, that's all great advice. I guess I could also add a little bit. I am also working in a non-teaching role in higher ed. I don't necessarily come from a PhD background. I initially joined as a PhD student, but finished with my master's. And during both my undergrad as well as grad school time, I worked in career services, worked as a part-time student in career services office, and that sort of helped build some of my skill set there, which is how I transitioned into career services after school. So if you're interested in roles similar to that or whatever other roles, see if there are opportunities for you to work as a part-time in those offices or in those capacities, and also that could be a way to build those experiences as well.
So Jennifer, I've got a question for you.
Yeah, of course.
So here we are, Dean, Alexis, and Erin sitting here. How did you choose us for this little job today?
Yeah, I basically started off with our list of alumni that I have or that we have. I also asked my supervisor, Patricia, who recommended most of you, pretty much all of you who have been who were alums and who are now working in non-teaching focused roles. And that's how I just started reaching out. And then also a little bit of digging on LinkedIn to see where people are currently.
Okay. Sounds like networking.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. There's so many things that you can do with the alumni tab on LinkedIn to find people in those areas. I really recommend it. And if there is a person working at a company or a position that you're interested in, don't hesitate to reach out to them and ask for advice, ask for information. Most people who like their jobs really like talking about it. So if that connection happens, you can definitely set up those informational interviews, as Erin mentioned as well.
And coming from the U of I, you have an amazing network. That's something I didn't even realize, coming to U of I for grad school, how great of a network you have built in. And like Jennifer said, people are pretty willing to say, oh, you're another U of I grad. Yeah, sure. I'm willing to, give you some time to talk. So don't hesitate to reach out.
Somebody's at the door. Be right back.
Just a few more minutes left for our session. What other questions do our students have or postdocs have for our panelists? I guess one other question, actually following up to the last question about hours for Erin, especially, you mentioned in your teaching roles, could you elaborate a little bit on those hours for your teaching positions?
Yeah, in some ways they were flexible, but in a lot of ways they weren't, because I had to teach, and I always taught a lot of times, especially at U of I and when I was at SLU, I taught very large classes. So for me to miss a class, was a big deal. And so it was very strict, you know, in terms of I had to be there Monday, Wednesday, Friday at a particular time. The other days I could be a little bit more flexible. But I would say I am also now not married to the academic calendar, and that is very different for me. And so that's something to think about, you know, as well, that some of these like alt-ac positions that are not teaching or research focused necessarily are either they can be 9-month appointments, they can be 12-month appointments, and they can be sometimes you're classified as staff versus faculty. So something to think about as you're looking at these different positions. So like at when I was at University of Missouri St. Louis, I was classified as faculty, which gave me very different, even though I was 12-month faculty, I got a very different vacation than the staff, people in staff positions. So that's something to think about when you're looking at these non-teaching focused careers is, you know, what does the time off look like? How, like for me, August was completely off limits in terms of vacation and things like that, because we ran a lot of events in August and January. So, you know, it might be a different cadence. So that was one of the questions I had when I started my new position. I was like, are there any times that are off limits? And they looked at me like, what? Like, no, like you know, if you're gone, you're gone, you know, we figure it out. And that wasn't always the case, you know, in academics, because you're signing up to teach a particular class at a particular time, or if you're in a different role, you're running events that are at the start of the semester or different times. So, you know, just something to, it's not a judgment of good or bad, just something to consider.
And I will say, you know, I'm on the side of being in a staff position and having, you know, very clearly outlined, and I would consider very generous, like vacation benefits, and you know, the ability to take those. And you know, as Erin mentioned, there's, you know, absolutely my schedule isn't as structured in that, you know, like the month of August isn't my piece, but there, you know, I have certain unmovable things in my calendar that I really, you know, have to plan my vacation time around. But, you know, other than that, you know, I do have a fair amount of flexibility to take that in June or October or, you know, bits and pieces wherever. And that's going to be really variable by kind of what role you're doing and what, you know, when you need to, you know, kind of be there if there are major events happening in that capacity. I think one thing I wanted to say off of what Jennifer said is, you know, what is the value of the PhD? I think that, you know, there are certain roles, especially research roles, that probably require a PhD. I think that within these broader academic positions, I think that there are, you know, being a higher ed institution, I think the doctorate is really respected and it's sort of seen as a credential that people understand in terms of some of the value that that brings in terms of, you know, a depth of understanding and a depth of experience. But I will also say there are a lot of positions for people who don't have a PhD. And so, you know, one of the things to think about if you're looking at some of these job descriptions is, you know, so this is if you are considering perhaps leaving your degree and, you know, leaving without a PhD, something to think about. But also if you are out there applying for jobs, you might not see PhD required in some of these job descriptions, but that doesn't mean that's something that wouldn't be valued or something that they wouldn't, you know, look at in a favorable way. So again, it's sort of different than, you know, sort of the professor track, which is everyone has to have a PhD. And, you know, it's a very structured kind of idea of how that degree credential qualifies you for the position. I think there's more flexibility on this side. And so be aware of that as you're looking at positions.
So, any other questions from our attendees here today? . I guess one other question I had, and for some of you, this might be a little bit more recent, for some of you not, but thinking about your job search process, can you think about that and give our students and attendees some advice on where to search or how to search for positions in higher ed, in academia?
I never actually searched for a job. But people I see looking for jobs are very good about telling people that they're looking for a job. And this is an important thing to voice to your colleagues that you meet at conferences or just even see in the hallway, because things happen. I don't know how John Sweeler found out I was graduating. He wasn't on my, faculty committee or anything, but somehow he walked down the hall and somehow he wanted me to be his postdoc. I should ask him sometime, I suppose, but I never figured that out. And it was clear that I was graduating, but people were talking about me, I guess, but I didn't know that. So make sure when you're getting near that point of looking for a job that you tell people, just tell people. And you might be surprised what happens.
I will agree with that. I mean, I think my first thing was going to say network, right? Let people know, talk to people, explore things. At least at the U of I, and I think definitely most public institutions, the job search process is pretty formalized. And so, when people talk about that networking, that's not a replacement for applying for jobs. That's something that you're going to have to do in conjunction with, going to a website and uploading your materials and, expressing interest in a particular job. But that networking is really incredibly important to that you're aware of those opportunities and that you are able to, present yourself in the best possible way when those come up.
Yeah, I think except from the job at University of Missouri St. Louis, which is a public institution, most of the jobs were because I was networking and I was telling people that I was open to work and going through your professional societies too, like for me as a chemist, American Chemical Society, networking there as well. A lot of different cities have local chapters where you can network in addition to, social media. None of the positions, were posted, but people forwarded them to me for me to apply. The only one that was kind of a cold call was my University of Missouri St. Louis position. But the rest of them, someone saw it and forwarded it to me, or it was someone within the particular school that contacted me and encouraged me to apply. It is really challenging to kind of apply to positions where when it looks like there's just like this sea of positions to apply to, and it can feel like you're throwing your resume or your CV into a black hole, because a lot of times you will not get a response back. You won't get any feedback. But there were different positions, especially ones that I really wanted to get, that if I didn't make it to like a second round or something, I would ask people if they could or wanted to give feedback. So like when we had moved to St. Louis, I really wanted to go into a teaching center, but I didn't have the experience necessarily for that. And I reached out to someone in the teaching center, and she told me exactly what I needed to do. And I did all of those things. And then I did end up getting a position in the another teaching center. So I think, I can't underscore that enough, the importance of networking. And I know it's, for a lot of people, it's not comfortable. It's not something that you really want to do in your spare time, but I think it's really important, and you can kind of dip your toes in order to get more comfortable with it too.
But
And
Erin, I think that you did a great job explaining, because sometimes I think people aren't comfortable with networking because they think you're calling someone up and saying like, "Can you give me a job today?" And that's kind of a hard conversation, and the answer is probably going to be no, right? But your description was, I'm interested in working in teaching center. Can you, give me some pointers about, how I could be more competitive for that? That is that's something that like it's a lot easier for them to say yes to. And and so I encourage people to like think about that as a model of networking, putting yourself out there. I'm looking for jobs. If you're aware of something, could you forward it to me? Oh, sure. Yeah. If something comes across like my email, I'll forward that along. It's a much easier ask than like, could you give me a job tomorrow?
yeah, and networking doesn't have to be something formal. It can be a conversation at a conference. It can be walking up and asking that question at a poster session, sitting next to somebody at lunch that you don't know, going out to lunch with a group of people from some other school or some job that are doing something that you find interesting and say, hey, can I join you guys? They'll probably be happy to have you. And a lot of networking is just chumming around and acting normal and being yourself so that other people can get to know you.
Awesome. That's a great kind of ending note, I would say. But any other last minute questions from our students? We still have a couple more minutes. All right. If not, do our panelists have any last minute thoughts or advice or words of wisdoms for our panelists or attendees?
I think my word of advice would be not to put undue pressure on yourself, that you have to know exactly what you're going to do and exactly what your life is going to look like. Because most people don't know that. Like, they just don't. And even if they do know it, life is going to throw you some curveballs and things are going to happen in a different way. Right. And so the question, I generally, like to think about is what do I want to do next? Right. What opportunity is something that's going to, help me do the next thing that I want to do on my path right now. And I feel like if you continue asking yourself that question and you continue answering that question, you are on a path where you have professional opportunities and professional satisfaction.
I think that's really good advice because I think I did put a lot of pressure on myself. And I think hopefully academics is doing a better job of this, but it felt like when I went into my teaching role that it was less than, a tenured position. And that's not the case at all. I think there's so many different ways you can plug into a university that are so interesting and different and just as meaningful as being on the tenure track. I think, like Alexis said, just being kind of open to what's next and what could be, and just building your skills and continuing to build your network and keeping in touch and reaching out. You're connected to all of us now, so feel free to reach out over LinkedIn or email. I'm always happy to have a conversation with anyone.
Definitely. Thanks for listening in, everybody.
Yeah, thank you all for being here. And as Erin mentioned, I'm sure they're welcome with connecting on LinkedIn or reaching out through email and setting up a conversation that way. So feel free to do that since you now have the permission. But Dean, did you have anything else to add?
You mean something profound at the very, very end?
I mean,
I
up
don't
to
know.
you. Totally up to you.
That's a pretty hard thing to do, but I think that over the years, one thing I've realized is that, a lot of funny stuff comes to you and you're supposed to do it well. And you think, boy, why should I bother with this? Why should I bother putting in the time and the effort and the stress and doing a good job on whatever this is that I've got to do? But you should. And the reason you should is because you never know that might be an important thing someday. Simple as that.
Yeah, that's absolutely great advice. All right, so we're almost coming close to time. I want to thank all our panelists again for their generosity in being here and for sharing with our students and panelists all the advice that you have. To our attendees as well, thank you all for being so engaging. Thank you for asking thoughtful questions. And keep an eye out for those recordings. For those that joined a little bit late or weren't able to be here, we'll be posting the recordings next week. And I also wanted to give a heads up for our panel tomorrow. We're having our third panel tomorrow on careers in clinical chemistry. So if you're curious about that, please do join our panel of 3 alums and other outside panelists who will be there and have interesting questions that you're going to ask. All right, with that, I'm going to sign off here. Again, thank you to our panelists, and I hope everyone has a
Yeah,
great
thank
rest
you.
of your day.
All right, thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.